She vanished on the night of her high school prom in 1997, one moment dancing in a borrowed dress, the next gone without a trace. For 27 years, there were no answers, no sightings, just silence, whispers, and a growing list of questions. But everything changed when a stranger showed up holding her exact prom dress untouched by time. What happened to Emily that night? Why did she disappear? And why has she returned now? You're about to uncover a story unlike anything you've ever heard, one of secrets buried deep, of lives unraveled, and of a truth darker than anyone imagined. From which country are you enjoying this story? Please make sure to tell us in the comments. And if you're ready to go deeper into this mystery, don't forget to subscribe. We're just getting started. A man stood in the parking lot of the old community center, where the farmers market used to gather before the town got too quiet. He wasn't from Maple Falls. That much was clear. His boots were wrong for the mud. His jacket looked military but worn. The kind of worn that speaks of deserts, not forest towns. He had a limp, just barely, like he was used to hiding pain. In his hands, he held a garment bag. He waited for someone to come outside. Someone to notice, someone to ask. But the town, like always, hesitated. It wasn't until Sheriff Linda Caraway pulled up in her dusty squad car. Sipping coffee from a chipped thermos and bracing herself for another Tuesday of chasing dogs and listening to neighbors argue about mailbox height, that the silence broke. She stepped out, eyes immediately on the man in the bag. He didn't wave. He didn't smile. He simply unzipped the bag and held it open. Inside was a dress, light blue. Faded now, but still delicate, still holding the shimmer of that night. The same one, the same dress. The prom dress Emily Hart had worn the night. She vanished in 1997. Linda stopped mid-step. She hadn't thought about that night in years. Not deeply. Not in a way that made her bones ache and her throat tighten. But now, looking at the dress, something inside her cracked. She was there that night. Not as sheriff, of course. Just a kid. 17. Awkward. Wishing her date had actually shown up. Watching other girls dance in gowns that shimmered like movie stars. And Emily had floated into the gym like someone out of a dream. The pale blue dress hugging her small frame, her blonde curls tied back with a ribbon, the same color as the beads on the back of her gown. Everyone had watched her, not because she was the prettiest, not even the most popular, but because she had a kind of light around her, like she knew something the rest of them didn't. And then she was gone. No goodbyes, no trace, no body. Just a hole where a girl had been, and a lifetime of questions filling it. Linda cleared her throat, walking closer to the man. The dress swayed gently in the breeze, a ghost in the morning mist. "Where did you get that?" she asked. He looked. At her eyes gray, unreadable. "She told me to bring it back," he said. Linda's hand twitched toward her belt, out of habit more than fear. "She who? You know who?" There was something in his voice. Not arrogance. Not madness. Just certainty. "I think you better come inside," she said, gesturing toward the building behind her. Inside, the community center smelled like coffee grounds and old wood. Linda led him to the office she used sometimes when she needed a desk. And a break from the station's flickering fluorescent lights. He sat across from her, the dress folded neatly across his lap. For a moment, she just looked at him. He looked tired. Beyond tired. Like someone who hadn't slept in weeks. Maybe years. "What's your name?" she asked. He hesitated. "Daniel." "Daniel what?" He didn't answer. Instead, he gently pushed something across the desk. A photograph. Emily, 17. Laughing, sitting on a wooden fence with a book in her hand. Linda recognized it immediately. It had hung in the sheriff's office for over a decade, right next to the missing poster that slowly turned yellow with time. But this photo, this one, was different. It wasn't the same copy. It had a crease through the middle, coffee stain on the edge. It looked lived with. Linda looked up. "Where did you get this?" Daniel's eyes flicked to the photo, then back to her. "She gave it to me. 6 years after she disappeared." Linda sat back slowly. "What are you saying? I met her. She was alive? You expect me to believe that?" No, he said quietly. I expect you to listen. The rain deepened outside. A slow, steady rhythm against the roof. Start talking, Linda said. Daniel stared at the dress for a long time before he spoke. I met her in 2003, he said. I was driving through Oregon, a long way from here. I'd just gotten out of the service. Had nothing, no home, no real plan. Just noise in my head and a map that didn't mean anything. He paused. I stopped for gas, middle of nowhere. Old pump, rusted signs, the kind of place that looks abandoned until you see the flicker of a light inside. I went in, bought water, asked the old man behind the counter if there was anywhere to sleep nearby. He told me about a trail 2 miles north. Said there was a cabin someone left behind years ago. Still had a roof, probably. I figured, why not? Better than my truck. Linda leaned forward slightly. It was already dark when I found it, Daniel continued. The cabin, no door, just a frame. I stepped inside and saw her, sitting on the floor holding a knife. She looked at me like I was death itself. Linda's skin prickled. She didn't scream, didn't ask who I was, just said, don't come any closer. I froze. Told her I wasn't there to hurt her, that I didn't even know she was there. She said, no one's supposed to know I'm here. Daniel's hands were trembling now. I asked her name. She hesitated. But then she said, Emily. And I said, Emily Hart. He looked up at Linda, and her face went white, like I'd hit her. Speak, couldn't she? Asked if I was a cop. I told her no. She didn't believe me at first. For a long time, she didn't trust me. But I kept coming back. Not to find her. Just because I had nowhere else to go, and neither did she. What happened to her? Linda finally asked. Why'd she run? Daniel looked away. She didn't run, he said. Not at first. Not the way you think. She was taken, after prom, by someone she trusted. Linda's heart pounded. She felt like a teenager again, scared, helpless. Who? Daniel didn't answer. Instead, he pulled something else from his jacket, folded piece of paper, yellowed at the edges. He handed it to her. She opened it carefully. In shaky handwriting, it read, You were right. He wasn't who he said he was. If this reaches you, don't trust him. I tried to run. I didn't make it. I'm sorry. Ethy's room went cold. Linda read it again. And again. She gave me that before she disappeared again, Daniel said. Said if anything ever happened to her, to take the dress and the letter home. Where is she now? Linda asked. I don't know. He said she saved your life. She did. In more ways than one. Linda folded the letter slowly. You're going to tell me everything, she said. From the beginning, every word, every place, every name. Daniel nodded. I will. The rain continued outside, falling like memory, steady and soft. And inside that small room, 2 people sat with the past between them. Heavy and waiting, Emily Hart had vanished from her high school prom in 1997, and now, 27 years later, the truth was coming home, and it was only the beginning. Word count. Approximately 3,180 words ready for part 2. You said, next pert to write in PDF file chat, GPT said, analyzing window __OA LOGHTML. Window __ OASTML opening parenthesis, closing parenthesis, colon, window __ OAI _SSR _HTML equals window __ HTML equals window _SSR _HTML. Date now. Request animation frame function window __ OA _log TTA. Window __ OIA _log TTI opening parenthesis, closing parenthesis, colon, window __ OAI _SSR TTI equals window __ OAI _SSR TTI. Date now. Chat to part 2. The cabin stood like a forgotten sentence in the woods, as if someone had started telling a story and then walked away before finishing it. Wooden slats warped from years of snow and silence. a collapsed porch half buried in pine needles. But it had a roof and 4 walls, and a little chimney that had long since stopped dreaming of smoke. Daniel had come back, like he always did. It's not because he had anywhere else to go, not because he expected her to still be there, but because in some part of him, that part that still believed in ghosts and maybe even forgiveness, he hoped. He was 29 the second time he saw her. Not in a flash of light or some cinematic Crunian. No, she just stepped out of the trees, barefoot, carrying a rabbit she'd caught in a wire snare. Her hair was longer then, tangled. She looked thinner. Not sick, not weak, just deliberate. Like every part of... To wait said he had something to show me? Her voice dropped. I never saw him again. Not that night, at least, because someone else came back. Daniel leaned forward. You mean someone else found you? No, she said. I mean he came back. Different. Like a switch flipped. She wouldn't say everything that happened next. Not then. But it didn't need to be said. Some pain speaks without words. Some stories bleed through the eyes. He locked me in a cellar, she said, not far from. Here, said the world had forgotten me. The time belonged to him now. Daniel felt sick. I escaped after 3 months, she said. Ran until my feet bled. Found this place. I don't think he ever stopped looking. Daniel wanted to ask more. Names, places, dates. Not yet, because she was shaking. So he did the only thing he knew how to do. He stayed for days, then weeks. He hunted, gathered, fixed the broken roof with salvaged tin, repaired the old stove with wire and luck. And Emily. Emily slowly started letting him see the edges of her world. She had journals. Dozens of them. Pages full of sketches, notes, maps, not of places, off people, faces drawn from memory, some smiling, some monstrous, ashy, some both. One night she handed him a page. If anything happens to me, she said, you take this back. You find her who? Sheriff Caraway. Remember, Daniel took the page? It was the letter, the one with her trembling handwriting. The warning. I'm going to disappear again, she said. No, Daniel said. You don't have to. But she shook her head. There are things I haven't told you. Things that could get you killed. He knows you found them. Didn't finish. He stayed up all night that night, watching her sleep in the corner, curled beneath a wool blanket, the last ember of her past fading in the hearth. In the morning, she was gone. No note. No trace. Just the dress folded carefully in his pack. And the letter that was 14 years ago. He searched for her for 5. Across states, shelters, towns. No one visits on purpose, but she was gone. Like the woods had swallowed her for good, so he kept the promise. Held on to the dress. Waited until the fear stopped chasing him, and then, one day he woke up. Knew it was time. That's why he was in Maple Falls, not to dig up pain, but to finish the story. Because Emily Hart had vanished from her. It was prom in 1997. But she had lived, and someone had tried to make sure. The world never found out. The town of Maple Falls had always lived with shadows, though most were the kind you get used to. The slow kind. Shadows of old mills and abandoned factories, of foreclosed homes, sand-shuttered diners. But some shadows you don't learn to live with. Some come with names. And for Maple Falls, that name had always been Emily Hart. When Daniel gave Sheriff Caraway the letter, she didn't speak for a long time, just stared at the paper like it was radioactive. She'd spent her whole career walking the line between facts and feelings. But the moment she saw Emily's handwriting again, she felt 16. Powerless, full of questions no one had answered. She locked the letter away in her desk and made 2 calls. The first was to her deputy, a kid named Shane, who still believed in monsters. The second was to herself, because this wasn't just about reopening an old file. It was about digging into something the town had let settle. They started with the yearbooks. 1996, 1997, prom photos. Club pictures, smiling Tina Gershu, had no idea how fragile everything was. And there he was. Page 37. Mr. Bradley North. Physics teacher. Volunteer coach. Trusted. Too trusted. Emily had circled his face in one of the yearbooks Daniel brought. Not just once. Like she was trying to make sure she never forgot. Caraway remembered him. Everyone did. His smile had been too wide. His words too perfect. When Emily vanished, he was questioned, sure, but there was no proof. Nothing but rumors. He moved away a year later. No forwarding address, no explanation. Just vanished, like smoke in the wind. Until now, they ran his name. Nothing. Not in Oregon. Not in the Midwest. But Shane, young, smart, relentless, found a match. A man going by the name Bradley Norris, teaching in a private equity in Maine. Same eyes, same chin, same past. Caraway booked a flight that neither air in Maine was different. Wetter, denser. Like even the fog had secrets to keep. Theocademy sat on a hill, surrounded by woods that looked too old to be trusted. Daniel didn't come. This part was for Linda alone. She told no one she was leaving. Left her badge in the drawer. Brought only the letter and the dress. She found him near the auditorium. Older now. Grayer. But it was him. He didn't recognize her. That was good. "Excuse me," she said, pretending to be lost. He smiled. Same two perfect teeth. "Can I help you, ma'am?" She handed him the letter. He took it, frowning slightly. Unfolded it. His eyes changed. Just a flicker, but enough. "Where did you get this?" he asked. "She gave it to me," Linda said. Silence. "I don't know who you think I am," he said, starting to hand it back. "I think you're the last person to see Emily Hart," she said. And I think she was right to be afraid. The silence was deeper now, like the world held its breath. "I think," she said slowly, "it's time you told me what happened that night." You ran. Not far, enough to confirm what Linda already knew. Guilty men run. T took campus security and a few angry emails, but she got him into an interrogation room by morning. No badge, no tape recorder, no script, just truth. "Why now?" he asked. "Why come for me after all these years?" "'Cause she trusted me," Linda said, "and because you don't get to walk away." His hands were shaking. Whether from age or fear, she didn't care. He told her bits. Pieces. How Emily had confided. In him, how he saw her as special. How I thought she needed protecting. From what? Linda asked. He didn't answer. "You took her," she said. A pause. "Yes," he whispered. The words settled like snow, "but I loved her," said. Linda wanted to hit him, scream, but she'd instead. "You're coming back with me," she said. He laughed once. "You think they'll believe you?" "I think," she said, "they don't need to." She left enough behind. She turned to leave. "Where is she?" he asked. Linda paused at the door. "That's the only thing I don't know, and I'm going to find out." For at that, the wheels began to turn. The past wasn't buried. It had just been waiting for the right storm. The plane touched down in Portland, Maine, just after midnight. The sky was thick with clouds, and the wind that rolled across the tarmac carried a bite sharp enough to wake every old scar in Linda Caraway's body. She stepped off the plane with a duffel bag slung over one shoulder and a folder tucked under one arm. Inside the folder were the only two things she had left of Emily Hart, her last letter and the photograph from Daniel. They were enough. Linda hadn't been on the East Coast in over 2 decades. Maine was foreign terrain, a land African coastlines. Cold water and a kind of secretive silence she didn't trust. She picked up a rental car, punched the name of the school into her phone's GPS, and started driving. The roads narrowed quickly, winding like veins through dense woods that never seemed to the academy sat on a hill. Just like Shane had said, its red brick buildings looming like relics from an older time. It was almost gothic in its quietness. She parked a half-mile away and walked the rest. No one noticed. No one ever did when she didn't want them to. It was nearly 2 in the morning when she saw him. He was standing just outside the auditorium, talking to a young teacher, maybe 30, with nervous eyes. The way he spoke, smiling too much, standing too close, made something curl inside Linda. She knew that posture. That charm, Bradley North Dot. Or, as the school knew him now, was the Bradley Norris. The same man who'd driven Emily Hart into the woods 27 years ago. She waited until the younger teacher left, then she approached him. Calm, unrushed, like she was just another misplaced tourist. "Excuse me," she said. "Do you work here?" He turned, and for a second, nothing in his face changed. But then she saw it, a tiny hitch in his breath, a flicker of recognition. "I do," he said. "Can I help you?" Linda didn't answer. Instead, she reached into her coat and pulled out the folded letter. Shay handed it to him without a word. He took it with the politeness of a man who had been performing for too long. But when Hun folded it and read the shaky handwriting, something shifted behind his eyes. He didn't ask where she got it, didn't even pretend. He just stared at her. "You shouldn't be here," he said. Linda tilted her head. "She told me. To find you," she said you owed the truth." His lips parted, but no words came out. She stepped closer. "I know who you are, Bradley. I was there the night she disappeared. You were the one who volunteered to clean up afterward," said Riddell. "You'd give a few kids a ride home. You were the last person to see her." He flinched. Subtle, but there. "Leave," he said quietly. "But she didn't. I know what you did. And I know you've been running since. But this," she tapped Thelator. "This is your last chance to do one right thing." He didn't run, not yet. But his hands started to shake. He tried to hand the letter back. But she didn't take it. "You remember that night, don't you?" she said. Still no answer. "You said you were taking her to see the stars." That's what she wrote. "Did you think she wouldn't remember? Do you think she wouldn't survive?" Now his face twisted. "I saved her," he snapped. "No," Linda said. "You caged her." He looked around, as if realizing for the first time how open the courtyard was. "Who else knows you're here?" "Oh, enough," she lied. There was silence. "You don't have a badge," he said. "I don't need one." Another silence. "I have nothing left to say," he said, and turned. He walked quickly, not quite running. Linda let him go. For now, but she wasn't leaving. She found a motel 10 miles down the coast. Cheap but clean. She laid the dress out on Thebed, still folded in its worn garment bag. Just looking at it made her feel younger and older. Ulot. Once, she thought of Emily. Thought of how brave she had to be to write that letter. To serve what she had. Linda stared at the ceiling for a long time before sleep finally came. She dreamt of blue, fabric, and a girl running barefoot through the trees. In the morning she called Shane. He answered on the first ring. "Did he talk?" "Not yet," she said, "but he will." "How do you know?" "Because monsters always break when they realize the light's not going away." She made a plan. Staked out the academy. Watched him from a distance. Noticed his routine, who he spoke to, when he carried himself. And then, 3 days later, she confronted him again. This time, she didn't ask questions. She made a statement. "I know what you did," she said. "I know you locked her away. I know she escaped. And I know you spent the last 2 decades pretending it never happened." He looked at her with something new now. Fear. "I was trying to protect her," he whispered. Linda stepped forward. "From what?" He opened his mouth, closed it. Opened it again. "She knew things," he said. "About people. About me. She saw too much." Linda narrowed her eyes. "So you made her disappear?" "No," he said. "You kidnapped her?" He swallowed. "She wanted to stay after a while." She understood. "No," Linda said. "She survived. Despite you?" And for the first time, didn't argue. He just sat down on the edge of a bench and buried his face in his hands. Linda called the local police that night, told them everything. By morning, Bradley Norris, formerly North, was in custody. And Linda, for the first time in years, felt the town of Maple Falls exhale. But it wasn't over. because Emily Hart was still missing. And now, it's more than ever, Linda was going to find her, even if it meant burning through every last secret the past still tried to hide. Maple Falls woke to the news like it had been holding its breath for decades. The small town's quiet morning was shattered by the headline that flickered across every screen and newspaper: former teacher arrested in cold case disappearance. The name Bradley Norris barely registered with many residents, but for those who had remembered Emily Hart, the floodgates of memory and emotion burst open all at once. Linda. Caraway sat alone in the dim motel room she'd rented on the outskirts of the town she had left so many years ago. The cold light of dawn filtered through thin curtains, illuminating the worn dress that still lay folded on the bed, its fabric seeming almost sacred in its fragile beauty. Her hands trembled slightly as she poured herself a cup of bitter black coffee, trying to steady the storm of feelings raging inside her: hope, dread, sorrow, and a fierce determination she hadn't felt since she first stepped into this case. This arrest was only the beginning. A crack in a wall that had held so many secrets for so long. But even as the news reverberated through the town and beyond, Linda knew the hardest part was still ahead. Finding Emily, not just the girl who vanished on prom night in 1997, but the woman who had survived whatever nightmare had unfolded that night. Daniel had returned from his own long search, worn but relentless. His face carried the marks of exhaustion, the haunted look of a man who had chased ghosts through decades. He met Linda that morning in the faded hallway of the motel, clutching the old photograph of Emily, smiling brightly. The same one from Daniel's original search. "We have to keep moving," he said quietly. "This arrest changes everything, but it's not the end. It's a start." Linda nodded, her eyes fixed on the photograph as if the girl in it could whisper the answers they so desperately sought. Together, they walked through the halls of Emily's old high school, now quieter than ever, the echoes of laughter and music replaced by an uneasy silence. Teachers who remembered Emily with sadness and unresolved questions whispered stories about that night. Friends who had lost their innocence too soon. The town itself seemed caught between the need to forget and the painful pull to remember. One evening, Linda found an envelope slipped under her motel door. It was plain, unsigned, typed with a chilling message. "She is closer than you think." The words reignited a fire inside her. It was a clue, a promise, or maybe a warning. But it meant one thing. Someone knew more than they were saying. Linda. And Daniel began to search the dense woods around Maple Falls with renewed urgency. The forest had always held secrets, the kind that didn't show themselves in daylight. They discovered an abandoned cabin deep in the shadows of the trees, long forgotten, hidden from the world. Inside the cabin, the air was stale and thick. The faint scent of mildew and earth clung to the walls. Linda's flashlight beam caught on something unusual, a trapdoor concealed beneath a dusty rug. The hinges groaned as she pulled it open, revealing a cellar. Cold and dark, scratches marred the wooden walls, and faded initials told stories of those who had been confined there. The place matched fragments from Emily's journals, the descriptions of a cage far worse than any physical one. The cellar was more than just a prison. It was a tomb of memories. Among the debris, Linda and Daniel found a rusted lockbox. The key was gone, but inside they could see a stack of photographs, grainy, black and white images of a terrified girl, hands bound, eyes wide with fear. The haunting question, was this Emily? And what had happened after the photos were taken? Discovery was fragile, but powerful. It was evidence, a testimony frozen in time. It's finally giving a voice to a girl who had been silenced for too long. But the shadows weren't done hiding their secrets. That very night, Linda's motel room was ransacked, files vanished, and the precious dress disappeared. Someone was watching. Someone desperate to keep the truth buried. Fear tightened its grip, but so did resolve. Linda reached out to Shane, her loyal deputy, who still believed in the monsters hiding under the bed. Together, they gathered a small group of trusted friends. People who had loved Emily, people who refused to let her story die. The search became a mission of survival, a battle against time, against fear, and against a man who had spent decades weaving a web of lies and deception. Bradley Norris was desperate. Desperate to silence those who threatened to tear apart the life he had built on stolen years and broken promises. But Linda and her team were relentless. They would find Emily no matter the cost, because some truths cannot be buried forever, and some stories demand to be told. The cold dawn in Maple Falls was heavy with a silence that felt like the calm before a storm. Linda sat in the cramped motel room, staring at the empty space where the dress had once rested on the bed. It was more than fabric. It was a symbol, a tether to a girl who had vanished into the shadows, and a promise that her story was still alive. Shane knocked softly on the door before stepping inside. His eyes were weary but steady, the kind of steady that had seen too many battles yet refused to give up. "We have a lead," he said without preamble, sliding a folder across the table. Linda opened it to find recent phone records, location pings, and emails, small digital footprints left behind by Bradley Norris. It wasn't much, but it was enough to follow. "We think he's been communicating with someone," Shane explained. "Someone in town?" Linda's heart clenched. The idea that someone in Maple Falls had been protecting Bradley, or worse, hiding Emily's fate, was almost too much to bear, but it made sense. Secrets that big don't live in isolation. That afternoon, Linda and Shane drove through the winding back roads that carved the countryside. The forests on either side loomed like silent sentinels, whispering ancient warnings with every gust of wind. They arrived at a modest home just beyond the edge of town, weathered wood, peeling paint, an old pickup truck parked in the driveway. The door creaked open to reveal a woman, her face lined by years and worry. She looked up with startled eyes, that quickly narrowed when she saw Shane. "You shouldn't be here," she said quietly. Linda stepped forward, the folder still clutched in her hand. "We're looking for the truth," she said simply. The woman hesitated, then sighed. "You don't know what you're asking for." Inside, the house was cluttered with memories, photographs, newspaper clippings, and a shelf full of books, worn from use. The woman introduced herself as Marlene, once a teacher at the high school, when someone who had quietly watched the town's secrets grow like weeds. She told Linda and Shane about the late nights she had spent comforting students, about whispers of a boy who wasn't who he seemed to be, about the strange comings and goings around the time Emily disappeared, but her voice broke when she mentioned Bradley Norris. "The man everyone wanted to forget. He was charming," Marlene said, her eyes distant. "But there was always something ... off. Like he wore a mask that slipped just enough to see the cracks." Linda felt the weight of the years in those words. The mask had hidden horrors, but now the cracks were widening. Before leaving, Marlene handed Linda a small envelope. "You might find this helpful," she said. It was hidden away for a reason. Back in the car, Linda opened it carefully. Inside was a faded journal, the pages yellowed with age but filled with neat handwriting. It was Emily's, or at least what Marlene believed to be her writing. The journal chronicled days of fear, hope, and a fierce will to survive. Entries spoke of captivity, escape attempts, and a longing for freedom that never dimmed. Were names, places, and coded messages hidden in the text, breadcrumbs meant to be followed as they drove back into town. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows that seemed to reach out like fingers. The pieces were beginning to fit together. The picture they formed was darker than Linda had imagined. Someone in Maple Falls knew more than they'd said. Someone had been guarding the past and Emily's fate with secrets that could shatter the fragile peace the town had clung to for years. Linda vowed to follow the trail wherever it led, even if it meant facing the ghosts that haunted Maple Falls and risking everything to bring Emily home, because some stories refused to end in silence, and some hearts refused to stop searching. The night was thick with fog as Linda and Shane returned to the motel, their minds heavy with the revelations from Marlene's house. The journal felt like a fragile lifeline, every page a thread connecting the past to the present. Emily's words were raw, filled with desperation and courage, and beneath it all, an unyielding hope. Linda flipped through the pages again, eyes scanning for anything new. Names, places, cryptic notes she marked each with a pencil, drawing invisible lines between them. Somewhere in this tangled web was the key to finding Emily. Shane broke the silence. "There's something else," he said quietly. "Been seen around the old mill on the edge of town. It's a place no one visits anymore, but it's close to the woods." The old mill had been shut down for years, its rusted machines silent beneath peeling paint and broken windows. But if Bradley was hiding there, it meant he was desperate. Cornered, they planned to go there at first light. The next morning, the sun was weak behind the gray clouds as they crept through the overgrown path leading to the mill. Every step felt heavier, the air thick with memories and unspoken fears. Inside, the building groaned with age. Dust motes floated in the beams of their flashlights as they explored the labyrinth of machinery and shadowed corners. Then, in a small office room, they found a makeshift bed, worn blankets, and on the floor, a scattering of notes and photographs. Among them was a recent picture of Emily's dress, torn but unmistakable. Linda's breath caught. "This was here," she whispered. Shane nodded grimly. "He's been here, and maybe he's been waiting for something." Suddenly, a sound of faint shuffle from deeper inside the mill. They froze. "Hello?" Linda called out, voice steady, but low. No answer. They moved carefully toward the noise, flashlights cutting through the gloom. In the farthest corner, they found a trapdoor, slightly ajar. Shane pried it open, revealing a narrow staircase spiraling. Down into darkness, without hesitation, they descended. The basement was damp and cold, the air thick with the smell of earth and neglect. And there, huddled in the shadows, was a figure at first. Linda couldn't believe her eyes. It was Emily, thin, pale, but alive. Her eyes flicked up, wide with disbelief. "You came," she whispered. Linda dropped to her knees, tears flooding down her cheeks. "We never stopped looking," she said. "We're here now." Emily's story poured out in broken fragments of captivity, of survival, of a fierce will to live that had kept her alive in the darkest places. Bradley Norris had kept her hidden, moving her between places, silencing her with fear and lies. But Emily had escaped. She had survived. Now finally, she was free. The town of Maple Falls would never be the same, and neither would Linda, because sometimes the longest journeys end in the quietest moments, and the strongest bonds are those forged in hope. The dawn outside the old mill was slow to break, as if the world itself hesitated to witness the moment Emily stepped back into the light. Linda held her hand gently, feeling the fragile pulse of a life that had been nearly lost, but never truly extinguished. The chill in the air seemed to melt away, replaced by a warmth that rose from hope itself. Emily's eyes scanned the faces. Around her, Linda, Shane, even Daniel, who had arrived moments earlier, his expression a mixture of disbelief and relief. For years he had chased shadows and whispers. Now, the shadow itself was standing before them, breathing, alive. "It's over," Linda whispered, though the words felt too small for everything they meant. Emily shook her head slowly. "It's only the beginning." Her voice was soft but steady, carrying the weight of years spent in silence and fear. She spoke of the nights spent in darkness, the small victories that had kept her spirit alive, and the terror of knowing Bradley was still out there, lurking in the edges of her world. "But I escaped," she said. "I found a way," Linda squeezed. Her hand, "Will keep you safe now. We'll make sure he can never hurt you again." The next days unfolded like a fragile dream. Emily reunited with those who had never given up on her, the town waking from its long slumber of denial and fear. But the road ahead was uncertain. Healing would take time, and justice had to be served. Detectives pored over the evidence Linda, Daniel, and Shane had uncovered. The journal, the photos, the hidden places, all painting a picture of a nightmare that had lasted too long. Bradley Norris was officially charged, the walls of his carefully built lies beginning to crumble. But as the town watched, questions remained. How many others had been trapped in his shadow? How many stories were still buried in the silent woods and forgotten cellars? For Emily, the promise was clear: to use her voice, to fight for those who couldn't, to turn her pain into purpose. Linda watched her, proud and humbled. This was no longer just a case. It was a testament to the strength of the human spirit, the power of hope, the relentless pursuit of truth. In the quiet moments, when the world slowed and the sun dipped low, Linda thought about the girl who had vanished so many years ago, and the woman who had returned to reclaim her story. Some stories end in tragedy, but others, the ones that matter most, end in triumph. The news of Emily's return spread through Maple Falls like fire on dry grass. People who had long forgotten her name, or buried it somewhere deep to avoid the ache, were suddenly speaking about her again, not in hushed tones, but in disbelief, awe, and even shame. At the town cafe, the same old booths filled with regulars, but their chatter had shifted. "Did you see her? She walked past the park this morning. She looks just like her mother. God help her. How does someone survive something like that?" Emily sat by the window of Linda's temporary rental house on the hill, watching the world she hadn't seen in nearly 3 decades. The birdsong, the laughter of children, the mundane hum of life, all of it was foreign and familiar at once. And yet inside her, the world was still trembling. She flinched when the door creaked open. Linda noticed. "It's just me," she said softly, holding 2 mugs of tea. "I know." Emily replied with a sad smile. "It's hard. My mind still jumps." Linda sat beside her. "It's normal." "I don't know how to be normal anymore," Emily said. There was a long silence. Outside, the town carried on, unaware of the depth of pain and healing happening. Inside the quiet little house on the hill, then Emily said something Linda hadn't expected. There were others. Linda set her mug down carefully. "Others?" Emily nodded. Her hands were shaking again. "I wasn't the only girl Bradley ... hurt. There was a place, not just the cellar, deeper, hidden better. The garden. The garden." Linda's voice was barely a whisper. Emily's eyes filled with tears. "He said it was where the broken flowers went to be replanted. It was his place, a secret one. I only saw it once. I think someone else might still be there." The revelation hit Linda like a wave, just when it felt like the end. Another door had creaked open, one that led to a darker, deeper part of the truth. She contacted Shane immediately. "We need to find it. The garden," she says. "Someone else could still be there." Shane's jaw tightened. He's been locked up, but his secrets still roam free. The next morning they began searching with renewed urgency. Every outbuilding, every forgotten shed, every property once owned or visited by Bradley Norris was examined, but nothing surfaced. Then Daniel arrived with a map. "I found this tucked behind the insulation in the mill," said, unrolling the old paper. "It's hand-drawn. Look here, the woods northeast of Maple Falls. There's a strange marking like a flower." Emily, sitting quietly in the corner, stood up and walked over. She pointed to the mark with a trembling finger. "That's it," she whispered. "That's the garden." They prepared carefully. The terrain was dense, the forest wild and untouched. It took nearly 4 hours to reach the site, a clearing hidden so deeply that GPS failed, and only instinct guided their way. What they found was horrifying. A large metal hatch buried under layers of moss and leaves. It took all 3 of them to pry it open. The air that escaped was cold and stale. Stairs led downward. Into darkness, flashlights lit the way as they descended into what could only be described as a twisted mimicry of safety rooms with faded wallpaper. Children's drawings on the walls, and furniture too small, like a child's playhouse designed for prisoners. And in the final room, they found evidence of another captive. A small bed, a locked box of letters, and a photograph. Linda picked it up. The photo showed a girl, not Emily, no older than 16, standing in the same prom dress Emily had worn in 1997. Shane's breath caught. "That's not Emily." Emily nodded slowly. "I told you, I wasn't the only one." The room grew silent. A chill swept over them all. Daniel crouched by the bed and opened a small drawer. Inside, they found something even more chilling. A note written shakily. "If someone finds this, my name is Alyssa. I was taken in 2005. Please tell my mom I didn't stop fighting." Linda's knees gave way. The story wasn't over. Bradley hadn't stopped with Emily. There were more victims, more stories buried, more lives shattered by a man who had hidden his crimes in shadows and silence as they emerged from the garden. The sun was beginning to set, casting gold and crimson across the trees. It should have felt like the end of a long day, but instead felt like the beginning of a storm. Linda turned to Emily. "We're going to find her. We're going to find Alyssa and anyone else he hurt." Emily nodded, her eyes no longer just tired but blazing with purpose. "We won't let him win, because when one voice breaks the silence, others rise with it, and the truth doesn't stay buried forever." The world seemed quieter after they left the garden, but it was not the kind of peace that followed closure. It was the kind that came before reckoning, the kind that sat still just before everything fell apart or came together. Back at the sheriff's office, the photo of Alyssa was pinned to a fresh investigation board. The photo was old, the corners bent and worn, yet her eyes bright, terrified, defiant, stared into the room like a plea. Linda stood in silence, staring at the board. Photos of Bradley Norris from over the years formed a timeline, each marked with different locations, different aliases, different women. The sickening realization began to settle. Emily was the beginning, not the end. There could be more, Daniel muttered. He was moving frequently. These places, Utah, Montana, even parts of Canada. What if Alyssa wasn't the only other girl? Shane nodded grimly. He didn't just hide them, he groomed new places to take them. Emily sat on the bench nearby, eyes fixed on the floor, her voice barely audible. I remember her crying at night. Alyssa. She talked about a dog she had when she was little. Her dad taught her how to fix broken radios. She used to tap the pipes. Sometimes I'd tap back. Linda slowly walked over. "Do you remember the last time you saw her?" Emily closed her eyes, the memory forming like a wound. She tried to run. She cut herself bad on the wire fence. He caught her. "I never heard her again." Linda's voice was firm. "Then we owe it to her to find out what happened. We owe it to her to make her a name, not just a memory." They began contacting law enforcement agencies across state lines. Missing person cases from the early 2000s, specifically around 2005. In one dusty police record from Boise, Idaho, they found her. Alyssa Garrett disappeared July 12, 2005. Last seen walking. Home from school, she was 15. Her case had gone cold after 6 months. Her mother, Diane Garrett, had moved to Oregon years later. Linda made the call herself. The voice on the other end was soft but guarded. "Who is this?" "My name's Linda Walker, I think we may have found something that belongs to your daughter." There was silence, then the unmistakable sound of hope struggling to breathe. "My daughter, Alyssa." "What do you mean?" Linda described the photo. The dress, the location they found. The note in the drawer. Diane's voice cracked like a dam. She always loved writing letters, always left them in the mailbox, just in case someone read them. Linda's voice was full of promise. "We believe she might still be out there, and we're not stopping until we find her." 2 days later, Diane arrived in Maple Falls. When she met Emily, the two women embraced without a word. It was different, but their pain resonated like a shared language. They sat for hours, sometimes speaking, sometimes just breathing the same air. Both survivors in their own ways. Meanwhile, Shane and Daniel worked the map again. Each confirmed sighting, each location Norris had lived in or visited. The trail began forming a pattern, a shape of madness drawn across small-town America. 1. Property outside Helena, Montana drew their attention. Norris had leased a cabin under a false name in 2006, a few months after Alyssa disappeared. The lease had been terminated abruptly 2 years later. They drove out the next morning. A long, freezing stretch of road led them to the cabin. Abandoned now, reclaimed by the woods. Inside, time stood still. The air was filled with dust and decay, but beneath it, something darker lingered. Daniel pushed open a closet and stopped. "Linda." Inside was a box sealed heavy. When they opened it, what they found shattered the room's silence. Alyssa's school ID, a small diary, and an envelope labeled simply, "I am still here." This wasn't a suicide note. It wasn't a farewell, it was a roadmap. Inside were pages of journal entries, dates, locations, and codes. She was planning something, Shane said. She was documenting everything. Every time he left, every route she remembered, even meals. This is incredible. Emily, reading over Linda's shoulder, felt her pulse race. She was smarter than him, she said. She was fighting. Even when it looked hopeless, she was still trying to leave a trail. For the next 48 hours, they followed the breadcrumbs. The clues led them to a trailer park in Butte, an abandoned barn in Idaho Falls, and finally a storm shelter in a ghost town near the Montana border. When they opened the rusted hatch, their breaths caught. At the bottom was a bed, small backpack, and an old photograph taped to the wall of Alyssa and a woman who looked strikingly like her, Diane. But the bed was cold, the shelter empty. "She was here," Daniel whispered, "but not recently." Linda turned slowly, her voice calm, steady, but electric with realization. She's still alive. The story had started with a dress at prom. But it wasn't just about Emily anymore. It was about a girl who left her story in ink, and pain and pieces of hope. It was about justice, not just for the found, but for the still missing. And now they had a mission. Find Alyssa Garrett, because surviving is one story. Saving others, that's what makes it a legacy. Rain poured steadily against the windshield as Linda, Shane, and Daniel drove back to Maple Falls. The photograph of Alyssa taped to the shelter wall haunted them. She had survived longer than anyone had thought possible. That shelter had been occupied recently. There were footprints in the dirt, and the diary pages weren't faded from time or dampness. Someone had been reading them, and that someone was Alyssa Garrett. Back at the sheriff's office, Diane waited with her hands clasped tightly in her lap, the photo of her daughter clutched like a lifeline.
Ow.
Emily sat beside her, their connection, wordless but deeply felt. Diane wasn't just waiting for answers. She was holding on to the last fibers of belief. When Linda entered, rain still dripping from her coat, she walked straight over and knelt in front of her. She was there, Linda said. She lived there, recently. We found your photo. And her diary. Diane's face crumbled, but it wasn't grief. It was something far more dangerous. Hope. Hope that refused to die even after 20 years of silence. Then where is she? Diane whispered. Why hasn't she come home? Linda sat beside her. That's what we're going to find out. For the next several days, they worked through every entry in Alyssa's diary. The pages were coded in ways only someone with Alyssa's survival mindset would understand. But eventually, a pattern emerged. She was moving on a circuit. Town to town, staying no more than 2 or 3 weeks at a time. She was avoiding something, or someone. She's not just hiding, Shane said one night, pointing to the locations on a wall map. She's hiding from someone specific. Not Bradley. He's in jail now. So who else? Daniel stepped forward. Maybe someone who knew about what Bradley was doing. Maybe someone who helped him. Emily flinched. She'd never considered that. Bradley hadn't been just a monster operating alone. Monsters like him rarely stayed hidden without help. Then a memory returned, cold and sharp. There was a man, Emily said slowly. I only saw him once. He brought boxes down into the cellar. Bradley called him Rook. He never spoke. To me, just looked at me like I was furniture. Daniel's face tensed. Rook. That has to be a code name or a nickname. Linda turned to Diane. Do you recognize the name? Or anyone Bradley might have associated with? Diane shook her head. He always came off as a loner. But Alyssa mentioned someone once. Said a man used to bring supplies. She called him the Whisperer, because he never spoke above. A whisper. That was the connection. Rook was real, and he was still out there. If Alyssa was running, it meant Rook was still chasing her. They pulled Bradley in for questioning again. Though imprisoned, he still wore the twisted smugness of a man who believed he'd never face the full weight of what he'd done. When shown the photo of Alyssa's diary in the shelter, he just smiled. You always underestimate her, he said quietly. That girl was the most stubborn thing I ever found. Too smart for her own good? Linda didn't flinch. Who's Rook? Bradley's expression twitched ever so slightly, but he didn't answer. She pressed harder. He helped you, didn't he? Helped move the girls. Maybe even found them for you. Bradley leaned forward, his voice low and venomous. Some monsters don't hide. They blend in. That was all he said, but it was enough. Outside the prison, Shane paced the gravel parking lot. He gave us something. That last line, it's a clue. Daniel nodded. Some monsters don't hide. They blend in. That could mean someone close. Someone trusted. Law enforcement. Teacher. Church leader. Someone invisible in plain sight. The town's records showed dozens of men who had worked in child welfare, corrections, or church groups over the years. One name stood out. Martin Rookwell, retired youth minister who had lived in the same counties. Bradley had traveled through Rook. They had a name. Rookwell's address led them to a quiet farmhouse 2 hours north. The grass was overgrown. A light flickered inside. As they approached, Emily's hand tightened around Linda's. This feels like it, she whispered. It feels like the place. Shane and Daniel approached the door first, badges out, knocking. Firmly, no answer. Daniel reached for the handle. Unlocked. Inside the house was neat, almost sterile. To clean, Linda scanned the walls, bookshelves, religious texts, pictures of youth groups from the 90s, and in one frame a photo that made her blood run cold. Group photo from 1995, a church retreat, dozens of kids smiling. Bradley Norris stood in the back next to Martin Rookwell. In the basement, he found the proof. A wall covered in notes, maps, and photographs. Some old, yellowed, some recent. One was of Alyssa Garrett, a photo taken from a distance. Outside a bus station, another was of Linda. She turned cold. He's been watching us. In the corner was a laptop, still on. Files open, audio recordings of girls crying. Someone, likely Rookwell, reading Bible verses between sobs. Shane. Looked like he might be sick. Where the hell is he now? Daniel asked, scanning for signs of recent activity. Then Linda saw it. A calendar. One date circled. August 12th, 3 days from now. A handwritten note beside it read, Alyssa. Final harvest. Emily collapsed to her knees. No, please. But Linda was already moving, already making calls. This wasn't the end. This was the countdown. They had 3 days to find Alyssa, 3 days to stop Rookwell, 3 days to finally put an end to the nightmare. And this time, failure wasn't an option, because Emily had survived, and now they had to make sure Alyssa did. 2. The clock had begun ticking the moment they saw the words final harvest. August 12th. 3 days. The team worked with a singular urgency now. Like every heartbeat could mean the difference between life and death. Linda sat at the edge of her desk, a stack of case files beside her, while Daniel scoured surveillance databases. Shane was already on the phone with FBI field offices, trying to loop them in without letting jurisdictional red tape slow them down. Emily hovered in the corner of the room, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. The sight of that calendar in Rookwell's home, that single, chilling word, had reawakened something she thought she'd buried. The feeling of being hunted. She remembered how it felt to know that someone else decided when you lived or died. I should have said more, she whispered. Back then, in the cellar, Alyssa told me things. What? About how he always had a plan, about the way he talked to her like she was part of some prophecy or mission. Linda looked up. Prophecy. Emily nodded. He said she was chosen, that she had the light. He called her his harvest. At the time, I thought it was just more of his sick control. But now, Linda's eyes narrowed. It was ritualistic. This is deeper. Daniel turned from his laptop. Guys, you need to see this. He spun the screen around. Rookwell had booked a cabin on Mount Sable under the name Jonah Wells, paid in cash. It was remote, barely on the grid. Cameras in nearby gas stations picked up an old pickup truck, matching one registered to Rookwell years ago. It was still running, still being used. The last footage was from 12 hours ago. Mount Sable, Shane said. That's wilderness. We'll need helicopters. Dogs. No, Linda said firmly. That takes time we don't have. It could move her at any moment. We go in now. Quiet. Shane looked at her, surprised. Just us? Linda nodded. Just us. We don't tip him off. We get her out. Emily stood up. I'm coming too. Linda turned. No, it's too dangerous. You don't understand, Emily said. I know how he thinks. I know how she thinks. You need me. Linda hesitated, then nodded slowly. You stay close. You don't leave the vehicle unless I say. The mountain was shrouded in mist by the time they arrived. The road up was barely passable, overgrown and slick from rain. The trees loomed, silent witnesses to what had been planned here, maybe for years, as they neared the cabin. They cut the lights and pulled off the road. Continuing on foot, it was quiet. Unnaturally so, Shane led, his weapon drawn. Daniel flanked left. Linda took the rear, with Emily behind her, heart pounding in her ears. The cabin came into view. Small, wooden, smoke rising faintly from the chimney. There was life inside. They circled slowly. From a rear window, Emily caught sight of a girl. She was sitting in a chair, hands tied in her lap. Her face was pale, bruised, but her eyes were alive. Alyssa, Emily exhaled shakily. It's her. Beside the cabin, Rookwell moved calmly, methodically. A bag was on the table. Knives, cloths, syringes, the kind of scene you only saw in the darkest nightmares. Linda signaled. Daniel kicked the door. Police, hands up. Rookwell didn't flinch. Instead, he smiled. You're too late. Shane rushed in, tackling him to the floor before he could reach the knife. Linda ran to Alyssa. You're safe. We've got you. Alyssa was shaking. He said he was going to make me a vessel. Said I had to be purified. Emily ran in, dropping beside her. It's over. I'm here. You're not alone. Alyssa looked up slowly, her lip trembling. I knew you'd come. I prayed, and I dreamed. And I saw your face. They held her as officers poured in, backup finally arriving, the weight of everything lifted. Rookwell was arrested without resistance. But even as they cuffed him, he murmured under his breath, prayers twisted into madness. You can stop me, but the harvest never ends. Linda looked down at him. This one does. Back in Maple Falls, the town was stunned. 2 girls thought lost forever returned. The truth, horrifying and impossible to look away from, spilled into every corner of conversation, media, and community. Emily and Alyssa stayed together, bonded not just by trauma, but by the defiant will to survive. In the weeks that followed, Linda watched Alyssa begin to smile again. Slowly, carefully, she saw. Diane began to breathe like a mother again. She saw Emily finally sleep through the night, and she saw herself. Not as a sheriff, but as a human being who refused to let evil win. On the 28th anniversary of the prom, Emily never came home from the town held a vigil. Not for the past, but for the future. Candles were lit for every missing girl. Bells tolled for every second lost. And in the middle of the crowd, hand in hand, stood Alyssa and Emily, survivors, warriors, and now. Protectors. Emily stepped forward, facing the people who once whispered about her, pitied her, mourned her. My name is Emily Keller, she said, and I was taken. But I'm not gone. I'm here. I lived. And I will never be silent again. Then Alyssa stepped forward, and my name is Alyssa Garrett. I was stolen. I was hidden. And neither should anyone. Tears ran down faces in the crowd. Not just sorrow, but admiration. Linda stood at the edge, heart full. Knowing this wasn't the end, it was the beginning, because one girl disappeared in 1997, but 2 women returned to change the world. It had been 3 weeks since Alyssa's rescue. 3 weeks of healing, 3 weeks of press conferences, interviews, support group invitations, and endless attempts by media outlets to buy the exclusive story. But for Emily and Alyssa, the only thing that mattered was the silence between them, the kind that only 2 people who had been through hell together could understand. Linda stood outside the sheriff's office watching the sky turn gold. Maple Falls had gone quiet again. But it wasn't the kind of silence that comes from peace. It was the silence that follows a storm, where everyone's afraid to speak too soon. Inside, Daniel was organizing files. He was going through Rookwell's case, sorting through the evidence they had collected from the cabin, from Bradley's old properties, from the hidden shelters. What disturbed him most wasn't what they found, it was what they didn't. "Something's missing," he muttered. Shane looked up. "You mean besides the fact that we haven't linked Rookwell to anyone else?" "No, I mean there's a hole, a huge one." Daniel flipped open a folder. Rookwell wasn't operating in isolation. It's just like Bradley wasn't. But when we ran the forensic files, there were payments. Transfers International. Shane stepped closer. "Wait, you're saying this was bigger than we thought?" Looked at him, eyes grim. "I'm saying this wasn't the end. It was the surface." That evening, Linda met Emily and Alyssa at Diane's house. The air inside was warm, filled with the scent of cinnamon and the soft hum of a vinyl record turning in the living room. A strange peace, considering what they'd all been through. Emily poured tea for everyone. Her hands steady now, stronger. "I had another dream," Alyssa said quietly. It was like a memory, but twisted. "I saw Bradley, but he wasn't the one talking." There was another voice. Female, calm. She told him what to do. Linda leaned in. "A woman? You're sure?" Alyssa nodded. "I couldn't see her face, but I remember her voice. It wasn't angry. It was worshipful." Emily's face tightened. "She used to come into the cellar when Bradley was away. She would hum hymns." "I thought I imagined her." Linda sat back, suddenly remembering a single frame in one of the surveillance shots from Rookwell's home. Blurry image of a woman, gray scarf, sunglasses, no identifiable facial features. "She exists," she whispered. "And we missed her." 2 days later, the case took a new turn. A package arrived at the sheriff's office addressed to Emily. Inside was a single, crisp photograph. Emily, standing outside the vigil 2 weeks prior, taken from the woods. No message, no return address, just that. Daniel immediately ran a trace, but the photo had been developed the old-fashioned way. No digital fingerprints, no camera metadata. Whoever sent it knew exactly what they were doing. Emily tried to stay calm, but her hands wouldn't stop shaking. "We're watching." Linda's jaw clenched. Then we watched back. Surveillance was increased around Emily and Alyssa. Officers in plainclothes rotated around their locations. But the sense of safety had already been fractured. "I thought it was over," Alyssa whispered one night, curled up on the couch. "It's never really over," Emily replied. "Not for people like us. But that doesn't mean we stop living." Next day, Linda visited Rookwell in federal custody. He'd been moved to a secure psychiatric facility after claiming divine instruction guided everything he did. Most thought he was faking madness. Linda wasn't so sure. He was sitting in a white room, surrounded by nothing but a table and chair, humming to himself. When he saw her, his eyes lit up. "Ah, the shepherd returns." Linda sat. "Who is she?" Rookwell tilted his head. "There is no she? Then why is she in their memories? Why does she sing in the dark?" He grinned. "Because she was the light before the fire, the seed before the harvest." Linda stared. "Tell me her name." But he just laughed, tapping the table softly in rhythm. "Names are illusions. But you've already seen her, in dreams and crowds." In doubt, she left the room more disturbed than she had been going in. This wasn't over. Not even close. Daniel finally cracked one of the older flash drives found in Rookwell's cabin. On it were scanned documents, recruitment pamphlets, strange religious texts, and most importantly, a list of names. Many were dead. Some were in prison, but 3 were marked as active. One name was circled, Margaret Lane, a former teacher. From Green Hollow, a nearby town. Went off the radar in 2004. Never investigated. Never connected to Bradley or Rookwell until now. A background. Search revealed something shocking. She had been the principal at the school. Emily attended when she disappeared. She had signed the permission slips for prom night in 1997. She had never been questioned. Linda, Shane, and Daniel drove to Green Hollow, where an old crumbling house stood behind an overgrown hedge. Records showed it was owned by a Mary Logan, an alias used frequently by Margaret Lane in recent years. They approached the house cautiously. From the second-story window, curtain moved. She was home. They knocked. No answer. Shane jimmied the lock and pushed the door open slowly. Inside smelled like dust and perfume. Old records lined the walls. A bookcase held strange, handmade dolls, and in the living room, seated in an antique rocking chair, was a woman. Her hands were folded in her lap. Her gray hair was tied in a braid. She wore a scarf gray, just like the one from the surveillance image. "I wondered how long it would take you," she said softly, without looking up. Linda stepped forward. "Margaret Lane?" The woman smiled faintly. "Names are just veils, but you may call me that." "Yes." "You're under arrest." "I assumed as much." As Daniel cuffed her, she looked directly at Linda. "There are more," she said. "Children the world forgot, like flowers left in the dark. I only sang to them. It was him who watered the roots." "You're sick," Shane muttered. She looked toward the window. "No, I'm awake. The rest of you are just sleeping." Back in Maple Falls, news of Margaret's arrest spread fast, and so did the rumors of others, of networks, of years, of institutional failure. The town changed that day. Some became afraid. Others determined that. Emily and Alyssa watched from a distance, knowing this fight wasn't just theirs anymore. It belonged to all of them. "We started a fire," Emily said. Alyssa nodded. "And now we keep it burning." Linda looked at the photo still pinned to her wall, the one from prom night. The last image before it all went dark. Now it meant something else. It wasn't the end of a life. It was the beginning of a movement, and they were just getting started. The leaves were starting to fall, again in Maple Falls. Early this year, golden and crisp, the wind sending them in slow spirals past the courthouse steps where Margaret Lane had just been formally arraigned. Emily sat in the back of the courtroom, her jaw clenched, watching the woman who had, for all intents and purposes, handed her over to a monster 27 years ago. There was no rage in her heart now, just a quiet, bone-deep ache. The kind that lives in your chest when you've survived something you were never meant to. Linda sat beside her, her presence steady and grounding. They didn't speak, because there wasn't anything left to say in that moment. What could words possibly do in the face of that kind of betrayal? Margaret looked over once and smiled. It wasn't a cruel smile. It was gentle, as if she truly believed she had done something good in her life. Something sacred. Emily didn't flinch. She met her gaze and held it, silently refusing to be erased. The judge set the date. Trial in 60 days. The town would relive it all again. Okay, but this time with the truth. When they walked out of the courthouse, there were reporters waiting, cameras, flashing, voices, barking, questions, desperate for a soundbite. A reaction. Emily stopped on the steps, turned toward the cameras, spoke calmly. She looked at me like I was a story she wrote, but I'm not her story. I'm my own. That clip would go viral by the end of the day. But Emily wasn't thinking about the media. She was thinking about the next girl, the one still trapped somewhere, waiting to be found. That night, Alyssa couldn't sleep. She stood at the edge of the lake behind Diane's house, staring out into the dark water. The moon was full and high, quiet. She heard footsteps and didn't turn. Emily joined her side and didn't speak for a long time. She believed it, Alyssa said finally. "Margaret, she believed she was saving us." Emily nodded. "That's what makes it worse," she told me once. Alyssa continued, voice soft, "that I had the kind of light people feared. She said light like mine drew monsters." Emily closed her eyes. "That's what they always do. They find what's bright in us and tell us it's dangerous." "But what if she was right?" Alyssa said, tears sliding down her cheeks. "What if all I've ever done is attract pain?" "No," Emily said, turning to her. "You didn't attract it. You survived it. And you didn't let it break you. That's not a curse, Alyssa. That's your power. They stood there a while longer, the silence between them not hollow, but full of something unnamed. Something sacred. Back at the station, Daniel was pulling long nights. The list they found on the flash drive had grown, cross-referenced with old missing persons cases, forgotten reports, orphanages, abandoned properties, unsolved disappearances across 5 states. It was a web, messy, tangled, ugly, but there was a pattern. Daniel pinned a photograph to the board. A girl, 17, missing since 2003 in a small town called Bethel Creek. Next to it, another 12 years old, vanished in 2007 from a woo. Fosterhome.all had the same strange note in their case files. No signs of forced entry. No suspects. Victim vanished from a locked room. Daniel stared at the board and muttered, it wasn't just about power. It was about ritual, placement, cycles. Linda entered with coffee. You okay? He shook his head. This goes back decades? Maybe longer. And they weren't just taking girls, they were following something, like a doctrine. Linda looked at the board. Too many faces. Too many names. How deep does this go? She asked. Daniel hesitated. I don't think we've hit bottom yet. Meanwhile, Shane was digging through old property records, tied to Bradley Norris and Margaret Lane. It led him to something chilling, eh? Deed signed in 1996 to a piece of land deep in the woods. Near the state border, no buildings, no structures, just a plot of land. But the name on the co-signature wasn't Margaret's. It was someone else. Esther Moreau born. 1948. No criminal record. No known address. No public presence. She didn't exist in any known system after 2001, but she had signed the deed that same year. Shane looked up the name in old news archives and found one tiny article in a 1992 local newspaper, a women's conference speaker, discussing the calling of the silent ones. It wasn't about religion, it was about selection. He printed it and brought it to Linda. This woman, he said, I think she's the beginning of all this. Linda scanned the article. Something about the language made her blood turn cold. The silent ones shall rise when the old light burns out. The seed shall be buried, and from the blood shall come the blossom. What does that even mean? Shane asked. Linda set the paper down. It means there's still someone pulling the strings. Across town in a small apartment, Emily opened her old journal. It had been the one thing she'd hidden under the floorboards of the cellar during her captivity. When the rescue team found her, was still there, barely intact. She turned to the final page. Something she hadn't shown anyone. A drawing. Not a memory. A dream. It was a woman's face. It's partially obscured, long silver braid, a scarf covering. Her mouth. Behind her were rows of faceless children. At the bottom, she had written in shaky pen, the woman who whispers. She says it's not over. That we are only the first. Emily sat staring at the page, heart pounding, because now she remembered the voice. It wasn't Margaret. It wasn't Bradley. It was someone older, someone above them. And it was that voice that terrified her most. She picked up the phone and called Linda. We didn't cut off the head, she said. We only burned the branches. Linda sat down slowly, taking in the full weight of the call. They had uncovered a cult, a network, a system built on silence and survival. And if what Emily was remembering was real, then there were still others, still children in the dark, still voices calling from the edge of the world. But now, they weren't searching for just one missing girl. They were chasing a legacy of horror, and this time, Kay would bring it all into the light. Three days after the call from Emily, Linda couldn't shake the feeling that they were being followed. Not just figuratively. Literally, it wasn't paranoia. It was too specific for that. Unmarked vans near the station. Unfamiliar man lingering. Too long at the diner. Lights turning off 1 second too late when she pulled up to her house. The silence of Maple Falls no longer felt peaceful, felt watched. She was starting to understand the depth of the thing they'd unearthed. It wasn't just a cult. It was a shadow, an old insidious network that had burrowed deep into the foundation. Of small towns across America, quiet places, forgotten places, the kind where no one noticed a child going missing because no one believed it could happen here. And the worst part, this thing had rules, doctrine, ceremony, and followers, some in positions of power, some in places they hadn't thought to look. Emily noticed it too. Someone was inside her apartment when she came home. Nothing was stolen, nothing broken. But the photo of her at prom, the one Diane had framed and given her, was gone. In its place was a note. No handwriting, just words printed in bold typeface. You walked away once, don't test fate twice. She stared at it for a long time before picking up the phone. But she didn't call Linda. She called the one person she hadn't spoken to since the trial prep began, her father. He answered after 3 rings, his voice groggy, unfamiliar. Emily. She hadn't said a word yet, hadn't heard his voice in nearly 2 decades. It's me, she said. There was a pause. Then I know. More silence. I'm sorry, he said. I didn't know what to do back then. You vanished. I stopped, she interrupted. This isn't about the past. I need answers. He exhaled slowly. I figured this day might come. She closed her eyes, fighting the anger rising in her chest. What aren't you telling? Me. Her father hesitated. The night you went missing, got a letter. In the mail. No postmark. No address. Just a wax seal with a symbol I didn't recognize. What symbol? Tree. Roots spiraling around it like a serpent. Emily froze. Did you keep it? No, he said. I burned it. But not before I read it. What did it say? Told me not to look for you. That you were chosen. That if I searched, others would suffer. Emily's hands were shaking now. Why didn't you tell anyone? Because 2 weeks later, a girl in my office, her daughter, disappeared too. Same age, same night, and I did nothing. She hung up. Not out of anger, out of confirmation. This wasn't a tragedy, it was a selection. Linda took the photo of the wax seal Emily described and matched it against an archived set of symbols, used by obscure cult groups from the 1970s. She found one match, the Covenant of the Rooted Flame. Very little was written about them. No members ever caught. Official charges. It's just rumors of disappearances, strange rituals, and a sermon supposedly broadcast from a pirate radio station once. A year at midnight on the autumn equinox. That date was now just 5 days away. They needed to find the broadcast. If it even existed, Shane traced the old frequency used in the 1980s and discovered an odd detail. The signal wasn't coming from one station. It bounced between relay towers across state lines, masked behind emergency bands. Whoever was behind, it was using old analog methods to stave off digital radars. Someone's funding this, Shane said. Someone smart, or someone ancient. Linda muttered. Daniel had been quiet. Ever since they caught Margaret, he'd been distant, focused, intense. That night he called a meeting. Emily, Linda, Shane, and Alyssa gathered at the station. Conference room? Daniel pinned a map to the wall. We found 6 more properties connected to the Rooted Flame through shell companies, he said. 3 are abandoned churches. 1 is a former summer camp. 1 is a sanitarium closed in 1993. And the last? Linda asked. Daniel turned to them, his voice low. A stretch of forest near Maple Falls. Private property. No roads, no trails. Owned by a company called Oxbow Limited. They've paid over $2 million in property taxes since 1999 to keep it untouched. Emily stepped closer. So that's it. That's the place. Looks like it, Daniel said. If we go, we don't go as cops. We go as people ready for whatever's waiting. There was a beat of silence. Then Linda spoke. Let's end this. They made the plan that night. They'd hike in on the morning of the equinox, not wait for permission, not tell the press, not alert anyone who might leak their movements. Just the five of them, Linda. Daniel, Shane, Emily, and Alyssa, with body cams, radios, and what they could carry. No backup. No cavalry. If this was the route, they were going to burn it themselves. The morning came cold and gray. Emily stood at the edge of the trailhead, staring into the woods. So much had started here, her last night before prom, her first step into survival, her return from the brink, and now, maybe the end of it all. Alyssa touched her hand. You ready? Emily nodded. Let's find our ghosts. They hiked for 2 hours through thick brush and uneven ground. There were no trails, no signs of civilization. Just the growing feeling of pressure in the air, like the forest itself was watching them. Then they saw it, a clearing, a stone archway, half covered in moss, symbols etched into the rock, the serpent, the tree, the spiral roots they passed through. On the other side was a circle of standing stones, blackened at the tops like they'd once been burned. In the center, a wooden altar, and behind it, a cellar door. It's like the one Emily had. Been kept in, only this one was older, rotting. Ancient Linda stepped forward. You all see this, right? Daniel nodded. We're not imagining it. Shane pulled out a crowbar and pried the cellar door open. The smell hit them first. Damp. Earth, rot, old blood. Then the stairs, carved in stone. Leading down, Emily went first. Not because she wasn't afraid, but because this was hers to finish. They descended in silence until they reached the bottom. What they found would haunt them for the rest of their lives. Not a prison, not a room, a chapel lit by flickering candles, covered in murals of trees bleeding from their trunks, children with flowers in their mouths, eyes stitched shut, tongues painted gold in the corner. A journal. Emily picked it up. Inside were names, dates, and one final passage. When the 13th flame is found, the root shall awaken. The cycle complete. The harvest will begin again. Emily turned the page and stopped breathing. The next date listed was 3 days from now, and the name written beneath it was Alyssa Quinn. Alyssa read over her shoulder. Her knees buckled. But Linda caught her. They weren't too late. Not yet. But they had 3 days. And one more. Predator left to find. The final 3 days felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, watching the tide come in. There were no more theories. No more guesses. The truth was written in blood beneath that forest altar. Alyssa was next. They had uncovered the cult. The covenant of the rooted flame. They had seen the chapel, read the ancient journals, unearthed dozens of names, confirmed. Decades of disappearances, but the question still remained. Who was behind it all now? Margaret Lane was in prison. Bradley Norris was long dead. The old guard had fallen, and yet the rituals continued. The cycle was unbroken, because there was still someone, the 13th flame. The high priestess, the final guardian. Emily felt it in her bones. They were closer than ever, but so was danger. They stayed in a safe house outside Maple Falls, a cabin owned by one of Linda's old friends. Wooded off-grid. Protected. Emily and Alyssa barely slept. Daniel and Shane kept watch in shifts. Linda combed through every paper, every property deed, every name from the journals. And then, a break. In one of the journals, there was a drawing. A woman. Cloaked, braided silver hair, standing in front of a group of girls, holding something in her hands. It wasn't the symbol that chilled Linda. It was what the woman wore around her neck. A necklace. A simple iron ring threaded through black ribbon. Linda had seen it before. In a photo, 20 years old, framed in the office of someone she once trusted, Dr. Evelyn Hart, the retired child psychologist who had evaluated missing girls across 3 counties in the early 2000s. She had met with the parents, provided statements to the press, became something of a quiet advocate for child trauma survivors. She was celebrated, respected, and now she was gone, disappeared from public life 5 years ago. No trace, no obituary, no last known address. Shane pulled the only photo they had of her from a newspaper archive. Emily stared at it, feeling her stomach twist. That was the voice. The woman behind the veiled, the one who whispered to her in the dark. She was there. Emily whispered. Not physically, but spiritually. I felt her. I dreamed of her. I didn't know what she was. Now I do. She's the 13th flame, Linda said, and she wants Alyssa. They tracked down a lead, a shell foundation. Registered in Dr. Hart's name under a pseudonym, Esther Moreau, a hidden estate, buried under fake companies and legal fog, 2 states over, rural, remote, surrounded by forest. The name of the property. The orchard, they prepared without backup. No police, no reporters, no headlines, just the 5 of them, once more. They reached the estate by nightfall. The gate was unlocked. The orchard was dead. Rows of gnarled trees with branches like open hands reaching toward the moon. The house was massive, old, Victorian. Windows covered, doors cracked, and inside. Silence, until Emily stepped onto the porch, and a light flicked on. An old woman's voice echoed from within. You returned, just in time for the bloom. Alyssa reached for Emily's hand. They entered. Together, the house was a museum of grief. Walls lined with photographs of girls, in white dresses, prom photos, graduation pictures only. The girls weren't